All right, everybody, listen up. Listen up, everybody. It's me, the Good Shepherd, Natalie, and I'm happy you all have gathered around as I get ready to begin reading today from Behind Barnway here on the small hobby farm. Part 2 of chapter 4. It was a really long chapter, and I know I myself can barely stand to listen to any video longer than, 2 minutes, which is why people love TikTok, because it's like 20-second videos. But not the Good Shepherd Natalie videos, never under 2 minutes, right? Chapter 4, Part 2 of 2, Final Gifts by Maggie Callanan. This is a book on understanding the needs of those in life who are literally dying. We're all dying from the day we're born, and yet we do come to a point in life where we are dying. And this book is about, of course, the natural death process that comes from illnesses and such things. This is not talking about tragic deaths with car accidents and overdoses and things like that. This is talking about terminal illnesses and elderly people. And this is really a most valuable book that is so special to me. Let's dive right into part 2. We're going to start off with Liz today. Liz, a nurse, was dying of breast cancer at 32. When diagnosed, she was working in a small hospital in her hometown. After receiving treatment several hundred miles away, she returned to spend her last months in the hospital where she'd worked. These were difficult months for everyone involved. Besides disfigurement, Liz was experiencing a great deal of physical pain. Her former co-workers were saddened by her situation, but also irritated by the steady stream of complaints from an often angry Liz. The nurses on the unit where Liz was dying noticed a pattern. Several times a week, former co-workers would bring lunch to Liz's room. They'd talk about what was happening on her old unit, about how patients Liz had known were doing, and about new cases and treatments. During lunch, Liz would get grumpier and grumpier all afternoon, and into the evening she'd be snappy and hostile. One night, a nurse, who often took care of Liz on the evening shift, brought up the subject. "You seem upset," she said. "Is it something I can help you with?" "No, I'm just in a bad mood," Liz replied. "I always seem to be in a bad mood." "Always?" "Well, no," Liz said after a moment's reflection. "A lot of times in the evening I find I have no patience. Everyone seems to get on my nerves. You must have noticed." "Yes, I did," the nurse said, sitting in the chair beside Liz's bed. "I've also noticed that it seems to happen on particular days." "What do you mean?" Liz asked. "Well, I come in at 3 in the afternoon. Whenever the day nurse tells me one of the staff from your old wing has been by for lunch, I know I'll find you upset." Liz thought about that and nodded. "That's true," she said. "It's worse on days when they've been here. They really bug me." The nurse asked how the visits usually went. Liz described their conversations and said that at one time she'd enjoyed them. "I liked catching up on all the patients and the gossip," she said. "It was fun, and it made me feel I was back home again. But it doesn't feel like that anymore." "What does it feel like now?" the nurse asked. Liz was quiet for a minute or two. "I know this will sound childish and awful, but they make me mad when they come in here and tell me what's happening on my unit," she said. "Sooner or later, they go back to work and take over what I want to be doing. I have to lie here in this stupid hospital bed and die." Liz's anger arose from resentment at her former colleagues' good health, vitality, and open-ended futures. Seeing what was happening, those caring for Liz were able to alter the pattern that fueled her anger. With Liz's permission, the evening nurse spoke to some of her former co-workers who had frustrations of their own. "Liz didn't used to be like this," one said. "It's very hard to spend any time with her. I guess I'll come back and see her when she's through being angry." The evening nurse explained what she thought was happening and suggested possible approaches. The next day, a friend from the old nursing unit began a lunch visit in Liz's room with a different comment. "I bet you get tired of us talking shop all the time," she said. "What would you like to talk about?" Liz mentioned her love of gospel music, and they spent an enjoyable half hour singing along with one of her favorite tapes. Another former co-worker, quite comfortable with expressing her feelings, visited later that week. She directly addressed the fact of Liz's illness. I miss you a lot at work, she said. I feel so sad about what's happening to you. This led to a heartfelt discussion of their friendship, their mutual sadness, and their expectation that they would meet in another world. Full of hugs and tears, that visit ended on a note of special closeness for both women. Anger may grow out of fear. Most people have at least some fear of dying. When dying people talk about their fears, many of them say, "I'm not afraid to be dead. It's what happens before I die that bothers me." Gentle exploration of such statements often leads to clearer expression of fears. I'm afraid of what dying may be like. Will it hurt? What is it like? Many people are also scared to discuss their fears of death. Late one evening, such fears often surface in the middle of the night, Helen said. What's dying like? But before I could respond, added, no, don't tell me. She feared the answer might make it worse, but my simple explanation relieved her anxieties, because what she had imagined was much worse than reality. Some people can say clearly, I'm afraid it will hurt. I don't think I can take a lot of pain. Others may say, I've always believed in God. Faith has always been a very important part of my life, but now I find myself wondering if it's all true, whether God really will be there after I die. What if there's nothing after all? If a person can't put his fears into words or says, I'm scared of the whole thing, it may be useful to ask about his experiences with death or find out what his questions are. Different experiences breed different fears and needs. Some people are simply afraid of symptoms of their illnesses. Knowledge of a person's history and outlook can aid in exploring these fears. Once understood, they can be discussed with the appropriate person. A doctor or a nurse can answer such questions as, what will my physical death be like? Or, will I suffer? A priest, minister, or rabbi may be the person with whom to discuss fears related to God. Some patients' anger grows out of fear. The sustenance or medical treatment is prolonging their discomfort rather than improving the quality of their lives. Now on to Gordon. Dying made Gordon very angry. Sullen in the company of family and friends, he was belligerent with his doctors and nurses, frequently cursing them, not at all the way he'd been when he was well. We looked for patterns. There really was no time when Gordon wasn't angry, but when did his ire worsen? When did it ease? What precipitated an outburst? Gordon was angriest with his doctors and nurses, especially when they were giving him medicines. One day, talking with his priest, Gordon said he didn't trust medical people. He feared they'd find another treatment and persuade him to try it rather than letting him die in peace. All these people do is prolong my suffering, he said. It helped a bit when his doctor said there wouldn't be any more treatments. But what really helped was a different approach. When nurses brought Gordon his medicines, they would take care to say gently, these are to keep you comfortable. They are not to prolong your dying. Gordon still glared and never grew warm and friendly, but gradually he became less agitated. The source of his anger quenched. Anger related to terminal illness has numerous possible sources. Many emotions arise out of the losses people experience as they face dying. Identifying these emotions isn't always easy, but trying to understand them makes it easier to respond helpfully to the anger. When it comes to bargaining, the easiest way to understand the bargaining aspect of dying is to watch a child at bedtime. One more hug, one more story, one more drink of water. How inventive they can be as they try to stay up a few minutes longer. Dying people do the same thing as they try to postpone the inevitable. They bargain with God. If they don't believe in God, they bargain with anyone they think might have the power to extend life a little longer. Many bargains revolve around treatments. I'll take this chemotherapy, people say to themselves. I'll stick to a healthy diet. I won't complain, so God will let me live until my grandchildren graduate. People with AIDS often make deals to spend the time they have left working to stop the epidemic. I'll get involved, they may think. I'll take care of others. I'll teach people how not to get infected. But God, if I do this, you have to let me live longer. Amazingly, such bargains often seem to work. Most dying persons' deals go unnoticed. The bargains usually remain secret. If a dying person does bring up the subject, listen with respect and say something like, "Wouldn't that be great?" Or, "We'll help in any way we can." With depression, a dying person's depression grows out of grief. Dying people grieve, as anyone does, for something that is lost. But their grief has two parts. They're mourning what's lost already to illness, health, family role, age, job, independence, but also for what will be lost when they die. Personal relationships, life itself, and the future. Most of us have plans and dreams. Children will have, trips will take, books will write, new careers will start. Acknowledging the reality of death's approach means abandoning these possibilities. Because they're lost, they must be mourned. These feelings of sadness and depression should be honored, not dismissed or diluted. To dying people, comments along the lines of, "Look on the bright side," or "You've had a good life," or "Well, we've all got to die sometime," seem like attempts to minimize or make light of their emotional pain. All you can do when they voice these feelings is listen. Often, no answer is needed, only the attempt to understand. Mark's cancer, which everyone had thought was cured, returned so extensively that he had little time to live. He sounded very sad, talking at length about how much it hurt to know he'd be leaving his wife, Joyce, and his young children. It was no consolation that he and Joyce had done all they could to prepare the kids for a future without Daddy. Mark knew how strong Joyce was and that she had friends to call on for support after he was gone. He didn't need cheering up. He didn't need someone to say, "I'll help raise your children," or "I'll try to be there for Joyce after you're gone." He didn't need anyone to say, "Well, at least your cancer isn't painful. At least you've had time to prepare for this. At least you've done something worthwhile with your life." What Mark needed was to have someone to listen to his pain, empathize with his sadness, and share his tears. Acceptance. Acceptance is a feeling of peaceful resignation that usually doesn't come to stay until death is very close. It's common for patients to experience interludes of acceptance and then in one day and in one conversation, in one sentence, slip into another emotional stage. But eventually death nears, at which time permanent acceptance may arrive. When this occurs, provided a dying person is comfortable, she needs little except the presence of one or two important people. If you are one of these people, you may experience mixed emotions. The peace of another's acceptance of death can be comforting, but with acceptance comes detachment, a drawing away from others no matter how close they have been. This can be painful for those being left behind. Max. A year before Max was to retire, he and his wife Paula began to plan a cross-country trip. During his last week on the job, Max was diagnosed as having cancer. His retirement began not with a transcontinental journey, but with 18 months of treatments, prescriptions, hospital stays, increasing weakness, and fewer periods of feeling well. Throughout this period, Max raged at life's unfairness and swore he'd get better. "I don't want to be sick. I want to be looking at the Grand Canyon," he told Paula. "I don't want to die. I don't want to leave you. I want us to have the fun we'd planned." But Max never made the trip, and in his last days of life, he lay in bed, barely speaking, his communication limited to a lowing smile each time Paula rubbed his back or brought his medicine or spooned him a taste of ice cream. He seemed completely comfortable and completely at peace, in contrast to Paula, who was neither. "I know I should be glad he's not suffering, that he's not in pain, that he's not fighting anymore," she said, "but I'm not glad. I don't want him to be like this. It feels so awful. It makes me feel so selfish to say, but he seems to be happy that he's leaving me. It's like he's going, and he's happy to be going, and I can't stand it." Max was letting go of the trip they'd planned, of his desire for a cure, even of his regret at leaving his wife. He was able to let go because he'd worked through his grief and was ready to die. To Paula, this felt like rejection. Max was pulling away from her. It was painful. She felt embarrassed to be taking it that way. This is not an uncommon reaction. Many people think they should be concerned only with the dying patient's needs, with the end of that person's suffering, but we are also concerned with ourselves and our own losses. Paula wanted Max to stop fighting and die in peace, but she didn't want him to leave her, and it hurt. The most important way to help her was to let her cry, to listen to her grief without judging, and to empathize with her pain. Most dying people, as well as their families and friends, go back and forth among the stages of dying, shifting from anger to denial to acceptance to bargaining to depression, many times in no apparent order and not necessarily in synchronization. Julia. As Julia was finishing 6 weeks of radiation for extensive and inoperable lung cancer, her family could see she wasn't getting better, and in fact seemed to be getting worse. She and her husband talked with the doctor, who confirmed everyone's fears. She had perhaps 3 months to live. They told their 2 adult daughters who lived in the neighborhood and their son, John, who lived on the West Coast. When I arrived the next afternoon, Julia's daughter Jane, a former nurse who was providing much of her mother's care, was weeping in the kitchen. "It's so hard to cope with this," she said. "Last night my mother was saying doctors never know anything and that she'll be fine if she can only start eating again. That made Dad really mad. He yelled at her and then stormed out of the house. He didn't come back for hours. And when he did, he'd been drinking. This morning my sister Sally calls to talk about getting in touch with a funeral home, and she can't figure out why I can't stop crying. Then my brother calls from California to tell me about some new chemotherapy. He wants to know if Mom's doctor knows about it. Is this family going crazy, or is it just me?" We started by talking about her sadness and pain. Her mother's prognosis was no surprise. In her hospital work, Jane had cared for many cancer patients. "I knew she was deteriorating, so I thought I was ready for this," she said. "I didn't think it would be so hard." This occurs frequently. Healthcare professionals often assume that because they understand what's happening to someone they love, the pain somehow will be eased. But knowledge only provides understanding. It does not diminish pain. Jane realized she was grieving and depressed, but was grateful that she at least was dealing with reality. She went over the reactions of others in the family. "Mother's in denial, but that won't last long," she said. "She's known for a while that she's getting worse. Last week she even told me she doesn't want to go on like this. Dad, of course, will be hopeless. He's always hiding his feelings behind angry words and drink. But this generation isn't doing too well either," Jane said. "John's a real wheeler dealer. I bet he thinks he can find Mom a deal that'll fix everything. And Sally, she'll be calm, controlled, and accepting for a while, and then she'll fall apart when something changes." When I visited a couple days later, Jane had an update. "We all changed roles," she said. "I yelled at Dad for drinking. He and Mom had a long talk about funeral plans. Mom had him call the priest. Father Wheeler came over and they put together a ceremony, and Dad's been crying all evening. Now Mom's working on a list of what she wants the grandchildren to have," Jane continued. "She collects music boxes and she's tagging her favorites, so we know who gets which one. Sally telephoned the doctor to see if that new drug might work, and John called to say he hadn't slept the last few nights, worrying that he might not see Mom before she died. So he's coming home this weekend." In short order, Jane had gone from depression to anger. Mom, from denial to acceptance. Dad, from anger to depression. Sally, from acceptance to bargaining. And John, from bargaining to depression, then acceptance. And these were only the emotions Jane reported or observed. This is a very simplistic example of what happens to family emotions when someone is dying. Everyone in Jane's family probably ran the gamut, and it's possible to experience several emotions at the same time. Each person involved has a set of feelings. Each brings to the situation a history of experiences and a pattern of behaviors. To some degree, most people die and react to someone else's death in ways reflecting their usual style of handling of crisis. Quiet people remain quiet. Angry, controlling people continue to be angry and controlling. People known for taking care of others may be trying to do so with their last breaths. How do you respond to these feelings? Struggling for the proper response. What if the patient is in denial, the spouse is angry, the daughter depressed, the son bargaining, the best friend accepting? The first step may be the hardest. Keep still. Do not try to help anyone deal with denial, anger, and depression in order to achieve acceptance, which many people see as the correct response to dying. Acceptance can be more comfortable than the other stages, especially for onlookers, but there's nothing right or wrong or well or poorly adjusted about any of the stages of dying. They're normal, predictable responses to a process. Try not to give advice or to look for solutions. Listen. Accept. This is difficult. If you really listen, you will hear pain. You'll even feel it. If only to relieve your own distress, you'll be tempted to offer advice or to attempt to diffuse the anger, to say something to avoid the pain and sadness. Unfortunately, there is really no way of doing so. How deeply will you be involved? If your spouse, child, or parent is the one dying, you may be responsible for most or much of the care, and so will be around most of the time. If the dying person is a friend, you need to think about how much you can be involved. The amount of time you spend with an acquaintance who is ill probably will differ from that spent with one to whom you're very close. The degree of involvement that seems to work best is the same or a little more than before illness set in, but it's important to decide consciously how great or little that involvement will be. If you decide not to visit or to be involved in a friend's dying, you may find it helpful to do something to recognize what is taking place. Many people find that sending flowers, cards, or a brief note saying "I'm thinking of you" allows them to feel they've acknowledged the situation. If you avoid thinking about how much or little to see the person, or if you think about it but avoid making a decision, feelings of guilt may cause you stress before and after the death. I let her down, you may say to yourself. I should have called. Now I'm sorry I didn't do more. Many dying people are lonely, not only because people don't visit, but also because of what happens when people do visit. Visitors may spend their time with the person wrapped up in idle talk about the weather, sports, or politics, perhaps because consciously or unconsciously, it's intended to do so. Their chatter keeps the dying person from being able to speak intimately. A dying person's world shrinks, narrowing to a few important relationships in the progress of his illness. When dying people aren't allowed to talk about what's happening to them, they become lonely. Even amid loving, concerned people, they may feel isolated and abandoned, and in turn become resentful and angry. This is why it's important to reflect in advance about how to help and what to say. Jean. Not long before her death, Jean wrote, "When the friend who was my main caregiver had to be away for a few days, people told her if I needed anything, I was to call them. Several told me so personally, but only one person made a special offer. I know you go to church when you're able to," she said. "I'd like to take you on Sunday. I'll be over for you at 10. Don't worry if you decide at the last minute that you can't make it. It won't inconvenience me at all." That call was a real relief, Jean wrote. "I can't take everyone up on casual offers that require me to ask for help, but I really appreciate it when someone suggests something they can do and does it. If you want to help with practical chores, offer specifically rather than generally. Don't say, 'Call me if I can do anything,' or 'Let me know if I can help.' Not only are dying people too overwhelmed to make lists of tasks for someone else to do, they may not know what needs doing, or may wonder if you're simply being polite. Instead, offer something concrete. I know you enjoy music. You could tell a friend, 'May I bring over some CDs or tapes tomorrow?' Offer to do the grocery shopping. Propose to vacuum or dust the house. Always give the sick person the option of canceling at the last minute. And by adding, 'If that's not what you want, tell me what else I can do.' You ease the way for the person to make a request. If you're the main caregiver, be willing to accept help. The assistance and involvement of others will ease your sense of being overburdened. However, when someone makes a generic offer to help, be ready to say, 'Thanks, here's what I need you to do.' Friends often want to do something but don't know what. They'll feel better if you can give them specific assignments, and you'll have more energy for other things." Talking of death is among the most difficult of issues. You may worry that you'll say something that will make it worse. People often think that if they mention death, they'll upset someone who is ill. Many worry that if they try to say anything about something as sad as a friend's dying, they may break into tears and cause the dying person to do so as well. The control that goes into maintaining such composure is sometimes perceived as a display of indifference. Sonia complained about her children's efforts to be very brave and calm. "They should cry," she said. "After all I did for them, they should be sorry I'm dying." Her son was taken aback. "But Ma, we didn't even want to make it worse for you," he said. "You know you've never been able to stand to see one of us upset. You always cried with us." "I thought it was because you didn't care," she said. Remember that not saying anything gives the appearance of not caring. Many factors figure in the depth and intimacy with which you and the patient discuss death and dying. If the person is trying to believe the diagnosis, learning to live with the illness, and preparing for death, you may conclude that it would be helpful to approach the subject. And often it is. However, the person may not be ready or have the energy to talk about death. Perhaps she has someone else to talk with, wants to spare you, or simply doesn't want to talk about it. Do not force the topic onto anyone, but don't shy away from it either. One way to begin talking about death is to let the dying person know of your interest. If you don't know whether the person will recover, asking, "Are you going to be all right?" or "Can you tell me what's happening?" may help you both get started. The first conversation usually is the most difficult. Once you've broken the ice, it becomes a little easier. Show that you're willing to talk. Then let the conversation develop. You might begin with a simple comment. "I'm sorry to hear you're so ill." Or, "I really feel sad when I think about what's happening to you." Wait for a response. Listen. There's no one right thing to say, although it's never wrong to speak of your love and concern. Don't worry about saying or doing the wrong thing. Most of us have said a few wrong things, and good relationships haven't suffered. Sick people usually tolerate mistakes made in honest, loving attempts to help. What's often harder to forgive, whether for the dying person or in one's self, is the failure to do or say anything. Dying people need the company of those who will listen, those willing to understand their situations, those who continue to offer love and friendship in the face of death. That completes part 2 of chapter 4. Well, this was rather an emotional chapter for me. Natalie, the Good Shepherd, to read. Listen, we're not here to air dirty laundry as what we're taught all our lives, and I'm not here to do that in any way. I have spent most of my life going back to being a little young girl, to being fascinated with, intimate with, close with, knowledgeable of death and dying. And for me, it did all begin with animals, with field mice, little bunnies caught by cats, birds fallen from trees, newborn baby birds, eggs. I was born to embrace all of life and death. And yet, as this chapter mentions, sometimes when we have the knowledge and we understand it all and we have the peace with it, and all we wish is for those who are dying to have the peace with it, sometimes we simply can't find the words or the ways to approach such persons who we wake up one day and realize, whoa, their anger for us is really an anger for life.